Friends, I've been asked a rather significant question regarding the nature and character of that enigmatic man known as George Ivanovich Gurdjieff. It is a fair question, as most people don't know the first thing about him, in part because he made sure that was the case. As some of you may know, he passed on, as the Orthodox say. He was born into heaven in 1949 in Paris, and has been misunderstood since then. The esoteric schools that have sprouted up with his legacy, most of them have turned the messenger into the message, which was the very thing he fought against his entire life. There is a certain worship of Gurdjieff because of his exceptional, exotic powers. He was clairvoyant, he was a master healer, he was a brutal, merciless teacher, and a man of prayer, full of contradictions that no one could understand. He was an Orthodox Christian who hated priests. Most of his students were European, French, English, German intellectuals of the 1920s who did not want to hear the word Christianity spoken to them. They knew nothing at all of the ancient Eastern Orthodox Church. It hadn't really crossed the shores, not its spiritual depth anyway. And so, knowing that, he knew how to play them. He knew how to get into their souls, under their skin, with a whole new vocabulary. In this brief expression, I want to make clear to you that we are not dealing with the Gurdjieff of the internet. We are not dealing with the Gurdjieff of the cult-like esoteric schools that are making money off of him and have failed miserably to make the connections that must be made. As I have said before, what must happen for his powerful legacy to continue, what must occur is that the fourth way, as it has been called, needs to be linked, connected, recognized in the holistic realm of the best of human understanding on spirituality. It cannot be divorced or separated out, because then it turns in on itself. It becomes some kind of incestuous way of thinking where they're better than others. Those who know better than those who don't, and all that nonsense, which Gurdjieff would have crushed mercilessly. This man Gurdjieff, who gave such a hard time to the pride and ego of the brightest minds of the day in Paris, Berlin, and New York, also the one known and witnessed by people like Bennett to be handing out money to the prostitutes of the neighborhood, who had this immensity of activity and giving that was utterly missed by his students, who wanted the secrets of the ages from him and were missing in front of their faces the goodness at the heart of the man. Not only did he bring out of Bolshevik Russia in the midst of the revolution in 1918 a ragged Uspensky and his broken philosophical career, along with the Dehartment and their aristocratic background destroyed forever, but he brought with him 50 refugees who had nothing to do with his teachings. And for the rest of his life, from 1918 to 1949, he took care of them. So he was so multifaceted that none of us dare judge him, because we can only know a tiny portion, a tiny bit of anecdote here and there. Just like many of you, I was one in my younger years, I'm talking 36 years ago, utterly fascinated by him. As I've said before, I knew persons of his body type, Mars Jovials, would tell it like it is, and could relate to something of his presence, and just was enthralled by all that he was, from the brilliant master to the trickster and all of that. When I say trickster, I don't mean a thief or something immoral, although we'll get to that too. I mean that when the Nazis were standing on the street corner in Paris, he would suddenly become an old rug merchant from the East and let those monsters think he was just some pathetic old man instead of the seeing to the core of your soul master teacher. So he knew how to act. There's a famous story where he stood up before all of his sophisticated intellectual students from around the world, and he stood there drunk, shocking everybody, all the rich women, the wife of the famous opera singer of the day, the writers and painters who thought so much of themselves. He really liked tearing down human pride, which is anathema to the presence of God and spiritual growth. And so there he is, this odd, drunken scene that shocks everybody, and then at the last moment of his talk, he suddenly straightens out. He's not drunk at all. And he tells them those famous words, "Do not mistake the vessel for the cargo." True content for what seems to be the external. Now, member asks about all this negative testimonial from his disciples. He was manipulative, erratic temper. Let me tell you about the erratic temper. So here's a scene. This 12-year-old boy who was at the Institute in the early 1920s and who had his own special relationship with him because of his age and so forth, witnessed Gurdjieff screaming in a rage against Mr. Orage, who was the head of the literary society in London, and on the radio. So he's yelling at this man, brutal rage that would melt down a bull. And then all of a sudden he turns to the 12-year-old. All of the rage vanishes from his face and he winks at him. And he turns back and rages at the man. Was this erratic and angry and crazy, or was there a point? Was there intentionality? It was all about purpose and consciousness. He was a chain smoker. He came out of the Caucasus, of Russia, of Turkestan, of that world where cigarette smoking was a non-issue and utterly irrelevant to anything. And the drinking, he liked his French Calvados. And I'm sure he could drink anybody under the table because he was a powerful man with a martial arts background. He was a powerhouse, and you know what? He had to be, because his mission in life, his divine given mission, was to bring what was utterly unknown to the West through 2 revolutions and a world war across the borders of Tibet with the Chinese spies and the Russian Bolsheviks and all the immensity of troubles of the times, to carry to you and to me in his hands a profound understanding that would revolutionize our ability to read the teachings of Jesus. And that's not to say that cannot be found through another avenue, but I say to you, if you really want the shortcut, the direct line, you need that vocabulary, that graspable, tangible teaching that he brought, so that you can truly work on yourselves. Even at the heart of Orthodox worship, where they bow and they cross themselves and they stand for hours and they fast and they do all these super efforts, that doesn't mean that they are becoming conscious. It's the inner work that occurs, and the inner work is a whole different story. It just so happens that Gurdjieff's roots were in that liturgy, his first mentor, Russian Orthodox. The business of his sexual relationships and fathering children and all that, what I say to you is that is none of your business. Who are you to judge? I will tell you at the same time that my personal preference, my resonance is, yes, to the saints, to the mystics, to the pure in heart. I'll take Theophan the Recluse and John of the Cross any day. And I will say to you that I agree. Gurdjieff, in his superpowers, in many ways failed. His magnificent dream of the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man died when he had this near-death, should-have-died car crash. Why did he have a car crash? He can say, we can say, there were dark forces against him, but the fact is, all those around him knew that he drove like a wild man, because that's what he did. So of course he had his weaknesses, his failures, his humanity. And what our job is to do is to take the best of his legacy, and not to judge a man that we can't come near in the efforts that he made with his fellow seekers of truth, traveling through ancient Babylon and all those places we know nothing about, seeking the roots of truth. He did not appear in Russia until he was 50 years old, already 30 years into his journey. And that's when it actually began, until his last days. I would agree that the better way to go, perhaps, in the long run, is the purer path of Christ, one that he honored, certainly. This business of falling out with his male disciples, that is inaccurate. What he did was force his students not to make him an idol. It was impossible not to do so because he was so mesmerizing. There's a fabulous story told and witnessed by Bennett himself, whose wife had cancer, dying of cancer, was suffering from cancer, sitting at his tiny table, Gurdjieff's table, in his little apartment in France. And they're eating his exotic Eastern foods that he liked to make. And Gurdjieff looks at her, of course, and recognizes that she is in pain while nobody's paying attention. And he says to her, "Where is your pain now?" And her answer, "You've got it." In his own special way, taken on her cancer pain. Our friend Bennett said at the end that he had the saddest eyes he'd ever seen. What does that mean? That's not failure. That's living in this world and seeing what a wretched place it is. Does it mean that inside there isn't faith and holiness and the joy, the reality of the one? And then a terrible mistake our member makes. He says that he was a friend of Aleister Crowley. That is dead wrong. Aleister Crowley was a monster, a Satanist, a sexual deviant. Gurdjieff met Crowley one time. These two powerhouse men met face to face, and Gurdjieff had one thing to say: stay away from that man, because he knew darkness when he saw it. Was he oh so human? Of course he was. Did he use opium to cover his pain because his body was broken to pieces and he should have died in that car wreck? I say to you, honor the man for what he tried to do for each of us right now in the 21st century.